Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most shocking and game-changing developments in the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. News has emerged that Ukraine has successfully destroyed what has long been known as Russia's Shadow Fleet, a secretive network of ships designed to bypass sanctions, move oil and military supplies, and keep Moscow's war machine alive despite international pressure. This event could be one of the most devastating blows to Russia's ability to fund and sustain its war, and it's a story that deserves a closer look in detail. For months, Russia's Shadow Fleet has been operating in the shadows, away from the normal scrutiny of global regulators. These vessels often sail under flags of convenience, hiding their true ownership and purpose. They are the backbone of Russia's sanctions evasion strategy, allowing the Kremlin to sell oil on the black market and funnel in resources critical to its military campaigns. The secrecy of this fleet allowed Moscow to maintain revenue flows even as Western sanctions tightened. But Ukraine's latest move threatens to dismantle this system entirely. The destruction of parts of the Shadow Fleet did not happen overnight. It was the result of careful intelligence gathering, surveillance, and precision strikes that took advantage of Russia's overconfidence. Many of these vessels were old, poorly maintained, and lacked the security that official naval warships would normally have. Ukraine identified weak points, exploited vulnerabilities, and carried out operations that struck at the very heart of Russia's illicit supply network. What makes this event so significant is not only the physical destruction of these ships, but also the ripple effects across the global oil market. Russia depends heavily on oil revenues to fund its war effort. With much of its oil transport relying on this covert fleet, the sudden loss of vessels will choke its ability to move crude through shadow routes. Already, reports indicate a spike in shipping insurance costs, higher risks for tanker operators, and hesitation from countries that were quietly doing business with Russia despite sanctions. Ukraine has been steadily expanding its capabilities in naval warfare, despite not having a traditional navy comparable to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Over the past 2 years, Ukraine has demonstrated ingenuity by using drones, missiles, and asymmetric tactics to neutralize larger and more sophisticated Russian forces. The attack on the Shadow Fleet is another example of this resourcefulness. Rather than matching Russia ship for ship, Ukraine has focused on strategic targets that deliver outsized impact. The destruction of these vessels also sends a powerful symbolic message. For Russia, the Shadow Fleet represented a lifeline, a hidden mechanism to survive the international economic squeeze. For Ukraine, striking at this system is proof that no matter how secretive or covert, Russia cannot hide from accountability. Each destroyed tanker or disabled vessel represents not only a financial blow, but also a moral victory that shows the resilience of Ukrainian strategy. It's worth noting that Russia has invested heavily in building this network since sanctions began after its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Estimates suggest that Moscow assembled more than 400 tankers to circumvent restrictions, many of which were purchased second-hand from other countries and reflagged under obscure jurisdictions. These ships were deliberately kept out of Western ports and operated through shadowy deals with middlemen. But such a massive fleet required coordination, and that coordination created weak points that Ukraine and its allies could exploit. Western intelligence agencies have long been monitoring these vessels, but until now there hadn't been a decisive move to neutralize them militarily. Ukraine's actions, therefore, are not only a military strike, but also a political statement. By targeting the Shadow Fleet, Ukraine has effectively challenged not only Russia, but also the global system of loopholes that allowed these ships to operate. It highlights the fact that sanctions enforcement is not just about economics, but can also be achieved through bold military measures. The international response has been mixed. On one hand, Western nations are quietly supportive because the collapse of Russia's shadow fleet aligns with their goal of cutting Moscow's revenues. On the other hand, there are concerns about escalation, as striking ships that operate in international waters could raise legal and diplomatic questions. Still, the broader message is clear. Ukraine is not waiting for the world to tighten sanctions further. It is taking matters into its own hands and directly targeting the machinery of Russia's war economy. For Russia, the loss is catastrophic. Each tanker represents millions of dollars of investment and future revenue potential. Beyond the monetary cost, it also means Russia will have to scramble to find alternative shipping methods, which are limited and more easily tracked. Insurance companies, shipping companies, and even smaller states that provided flags of convenience are now under more scrutiny, making it harder for Russia to rebuild the network. In the meantime, the shortage of reliable transport will eat into Russia's oil exports, directly impacting the Kremlin's war chest. Ukraine's strike on the Shadow Fleet also demonstrates the increasing effectiveness of unmanned naval drones and long-range strike technology. Over the past year, Ukraine has been developing sea drones capable of carrying explosives and striking ships with pinpoint accuracy. These drones are cheaper, harder to detect, and expendable compared to traditional warships. In the attack on the Shadow Fleet, reports suggest that a combination of drones and precision missile strikes were used, showcasing Ukraine's evolution into a modern asymmetric naval power. The psychological effect on Russia should not be underestimated. Moscow has long believed that the Shadow Fleet was untouchable, operating outside of Ukraine's immediate reach. The sudden reality that these ships can be tracked and destroyed will cause panic among Russian planners and investors who thought they had found a safe workaround to sanctions. This fear will slow operations, force Russia to divert resources to protection, and reduce overall efficiency. Meanwhile, for Ukraine, this victory boosts morale at home and abroad. Domestically, it shows citizens that their sacrifices are leading to tangible results that hurt Russia in meaningful ways. Internationally, it strengthens Ukraine's case for continued military aid and investment in advanced technologies. Allies can now see that Ukraine is not only defending its territory, but also dismantling the global systems that keep Russia afloat. Economically, the destruction of the Shadow Fleet may accelerate Russia's decline. Oil revenues already make up a large share of the Russian government's budget. With pipelines limited and controlled routes under pressure, maritime shipping has been the only flexible outlet. Now, with a significant portion of that outlet destroyed, Russia faces a tightening noose. Analysts warn that this could lead to budget shortfalls, reduced spending power for the military, and rising discontent inside Russia as the war drags on. In the coming weeks, we will likely see attempts by Russia to rebuild or replace lost ships. However, this will not be easy. The global second-hand tanker market has already been strained by Moscow's earlier purchases, and additional acquisitions will attract attention. Countries that sold ships under the radar before may now be reluctant, fearing backlash or sanctions themselves. The reconstruction of the Shadow Fleet will therefore be slower, riskier, and more expensive, adding another layer of pressure on the Kremlin. Ukraine's strategy also shows how modern warfare has shifted away from brute force and toward precision and disruption. Rather than engaging Russia in costly ship-to-ship battles, Ukraine focused on the weak points in the logistical chain. Destroying the Shadow Fleet is not just about sinking ships, it's about collapsing the financial scaffolding that supports Russia's military aggression. This strategy will be studied by military analysts for years as an example of how a smaller power can cripple a larger adversary through unconventional means. There's also an environmental concern attached to this. The Shadow Fleet was notorious for operating unsafe, aging ships with minimal regard for safety or ecological regulations. Many experts warned of the risk of oil spills and maritime disasters as these ships moved through international waters. By destroying them, Ukraine may have prevented future ecological catastrophes that would have affected coastal nations around the world. This gives the action another layer of justification, as it wasn't just a military necessity, but also a global environmental safeguard. Looking forward, Russia will likely retaliate in some form. Moscow cannot afford to let such a blow pass without a response. This could mean increased attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure, attempts to sabotage global shipping, or intensified pressure on nations that support Ukraine. However, each retaliation further isolates Russia and deepens the perception that it is losing control. The collapse of the Shadow Fleet may also shift diplomatic calculations. Countries that were hesitant to align too closely with Ukraine may now see greater value in supporting it, given the effectiveness of its strategies. At the same time, states that quietly benefited from Russia's shadow oil deals may feel exposed and pressured to change course. In this sense, the impact of this strike reaches far beyond the battlefield. In summary, Ukraine's destruction of Russia's Shadow Fleet is a turning point in the war. It cripples a key lifeline of Moscow's economy, demonstrates the effectiveness of Ukraine's naval innovations, and sends a powerful message that even Russia's most secretive strategies are vulnerable. This event could mark the beginning of a new phase in the conflict, one where Ukraine not only defends itself, but actively dismantles the financial and logistical networks that sustain Russia's aggression. As the war continues, one thing is clear. Ukraine has shown that determination, intelligence, and innovation can overcome even the most carefully hidden operations. Russia's Shadow Fleet is no longer in the shadows, and its destruction will echo across the battlefield, the markets, and the world stage.